which is the future of synthetic meat. So you come from a cattle ranch, you're a part of the whole ag system, and every once in a while, every couple of months, the idea that synthetic meat is going to come in and disrupt the supply chain is thrown out there. And then there's other people that say there's no chance, it'll never happen. What are your thoughts? First of all, what is synthetic meat, and where do you think its future potential is?
Yeah. So I would just first of all draw the distinction, because I think sometimes there's some confusion of when we talk about the category of alternative meats, that includes the first category of plant-based, which is on the market, right? That's Beyond Meat, that's Impossible Foods, that's, your Kroger private label at this point, right? That's just plant-based protein. It's on the market. It is what it is. There's a lot of venture capital going behind that to brand and market that. But it is what it is. It's here. There's nothing technologically challenging about it. It's a consumer acceptance challenge that they have, right? Which they're marketing their way through. Then the second category, which is what you're talking about, of synthetic meats. So cell cultured meat that is grown in a lab. Advocates would say it's still meat because you are starting from animal cells, right? That is what you are growing this from. You are culturing this product. So it's kind of funny. A couple of years ago, I kind of bought into a lot of the hype, and especially being in San Francisco, I had bought into the hype in terms of like the inevitability of the category to be successful. And then I started talking with a couple of venture people at some of the processors, the meat processors, who have invested in some of these startups. And they were saying, look, we're investing in these companies. We're keeping this door open. We don't see a path. There is not a projected timeline of when this is going to be economically feasible. We can't tell you when that is. Maybe it's in 5 years. Maybe it's in 20 years. Maybe the venture capital bubble dries up before that technology has the chance to really work out its unit economics. So, and that's coming from people who are betting on it, right? So there's that. I've done some due diligence recently, looking at some of the startups in the space, and the challenge is just the cost of production, right? Nobody buys a pound of synthetic ground beef if it costs $100 a pound. There's not a market for that, right? Beyond, some 5 pounds a year kind of market, right? It's super tiny. So their big challenge is they have to get the cost down. That said, there are more and more companies that are working on innovating around the specific drivers of cost of synthetic meats. And so potentially, that cost does come down. The other piece of it is that my hypothesis is there's a little bit of a venture capital bubble around synthetic meat. There is so much capital that has gone in. It is the generally accepted view that synthetic meat will disrupt the animal protein market. And so I just wonder if we're now trying to solve problems with money that money can't actually solve, because these are technology problems, right?
Yeah, or even that demand will actually be there for. One of the most interesting things, one of my clients is in the baking industry, and so I recently was reading some research on this. People's eating habits changed more in the last 9 months, at least with regards to baking, than they've probably changed in 100 years, right? Like there was people went from being like, I don't like carbs, I want only keto, or I want, something else, to buying massive amounts of packaged baked goods, doing huge amounts of baking at home. Like there was a shortage of flour, and this actually extended even beyond when restaurants started to be able to allocate their flour out. Like this demand was huge, and you have to wonder, you're throwing all that venture capital money towards synthetic meat because there's this drive, or there has been this drive away from animal agriculture, when it really just took a pandemic for people to go out and buy all the meat on all the shelves that they could find anywhere.
Right. I mean, it was effectively the comfort food category, right? And across all of animal protein, whether that's dairy, butter, cheese, or meat, that's where the shelves were empty. That's what people defaulted to. It's just interesting. I do like to play that game of what impact will it have and what is the time horizon for synthetic meats. The game that I'm more interested in playing, though, is how do we use that as a catalyst for the actual animal protein production industry to address the things that consumers are saying are concerning, right? Or that customers are saying are concerning. And how do we just say, you know what, there is this existential threat coming. It may never come to fruition. It may be a long time, but we probably need to not get complacent in the meantime. So that's kind of more of the message that I'm interested in, is how do we then align the right resources and capital and people around the big problems that need solving in animal agriculture.
Well, and then in animal ag, one of the big things that happened during coronavirus was this huge upswing of people actually being willing to pay for local. Do you, when you're looking at this, do you think, this is just kind of a blip because it was insecure and people are doing that? Or would you say, no, this local thing now got the traction it needed to be able to drive forward in some meaningful way?
Yeah. So I haven't seen any aggregate numbers, right? But just anecdotally, talk to any producer trying to get a appointment at their local custom packing plant, and they can't get an appointment for another 12 to 18 months, right? So if somebody had the calculation of what's the total custom packing plant capacity in the U.S., we would know that that's roughly the number of locally processed animals that have been bought in 2020 and planned to purchase for 2021. So let's say that number, 2 to 3x from what it was in 2019. Even if it comes back down some, we're still significantly further ahead than where we were, right? So I expect that trend to continue, even if it's not at the same pandemic levels. I think there are enough people that they went and bought a freezer, and so that now they have the freezer capacity, and so they want the beef in that freezer. It obviously raises the gigantic bottleneck for that local market is processing capacity. And so that's the piece that we've got to figure out. There are reasons that the packing industry is structured the way it is. There are reasons that packers build bigger and bigger plants. And so the economics and the value proposition of working through that processing capacity question at a local level, it's a tough one. And it's not going to be figured out overnight. But that's the big bottleneck. That's what we've got to figure out some way.
Do you imagine that the Cargills and ADMs and the companies that had made investments into synthetic meat because they wanted to keep an eye on it, will they also try and do some sort of decentralization? Will they create custom packing plants or smaller avenues for people to get their meat out?
I don't see it happening just because of the margins and the economics of it. I think it's much more likely to be some sort of private equity type capital that does some aggregation, that builds new capacity. I don't see it being the big packers. I mean, they're playing the volume game, and if the local game were big enough that it was meaningful to win in that, then there would be incentive there. But I just think that it's too fragmented. They're just two completely separate business models. So I think private equity is the most likely capital source to solve the processing problem.
Thanks for checking out this podcast short. If you like this interview, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button and hit that bell so you always get notified about this podcast. And if you're really interested in conversations like this, you may want to consider joining the Articulate Ventures Network. To find out more, go to network.articulate.ventures.